Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to MetrObelisk Radio. Today we are going to be doing a review analysis of J.J. Abrams' first Star Trek movie. Now, I did go see this opening weekend back when it originally came out, and I thought it was the worst Star Trek movie ever made. Now, in all fairness, my opinion has softened over the years. So without further ado, in this review analysis, I will be going over the creative team's credentials prior to the release of this movie, an actor character analysis, followed by a breakdown of the movie, and then asking the question, is this a good or bad Star Trek movie, and ending off with my personal rating of the movie on a 1 to 10 point scale. So starting with the creative team, I am only going to be focusing on the director and the writers because I feel that those are the most important to any movie's success. So with that out of the way, this movie was obviously directed by J.J. Abrams, and at this time, he really wasn't an established movie director. The only movie he did prior to this was Mission Impossible 3. Most of his projects were on television, and most notably, he was the creator of both Alias and Lost. Now, the two writers on the movie were Roberto Orci and Alex Kurtzman. They both worked together on Alias. They also wrote Michael Bay's The Island and the first Transformers movie. The Legend of Zorro, and Mission Impossible 3 with J.J. Abrams. So keep in mind that all three of these guys have worked together in the past. So, whether that's a positive or a negative is really up to the person. Now we are up to our character analysis, where I will do a breakdown of each of the characters in the movie, along with their corresponding actors. Of course, starting with Chris Pine's Captain Kirk. I didn't really mind Chris Pine as Captain Kirk, and it makes sense why he's more cocky in this movie, because he's less experienced than William Shatner's Captain Kirk, since he had been running the Enterprise a lot longer by the original series. So next up would be Zachary Quinto's Spock, obviously the half-human, half-Vulcan. I really didn't like the portrayal of Spock in this movie, because he came across as just very smug and very arrogant. Also just wanted to fight Kirk the entire movie over who was superior of the two, and I felt it was really out of place. However, I did like Carl Urban as Dr. McCoy. No DeForest Kelley, but again, a decent portrayal of Dr. McCoy. Zoe Saldana as Uhura. She's not really in the spotlight, but her and Spock have a really unnecessary romance during the movie. Then you have John Cho as Sulu. I really didn't care that John Cho was Sulu. I didn't even really care about Sulu in the original series, other than he was always the guy that always went, course laid in, Captain. I always preferred Chekhov to Sulu, which leads right into our next guy, which is Anton Yelchin as Chekhov. I liked Anton Yelchin as Chekhov, but I have a bias towards the original series, so I have to go with Walter Koenig in this. Next up would be Simon Pegg as Scotty. I actually really liked Simon Pegg as Scotty. I think he and James Doohan have their strengths and weaknesses, so I put them both on the exact same pedestal. Bruce Greenwood actually comes in as the one and only Captain Pike, who was originally played by Jeffrey Hunter in the unaired pilot called The Cage. It's really hard to compare Bruce Greenwood to Jeffrey Hunter, knowing that The Cage was not officially a part of the series. It didn't air until the late 80s. And the final guy that I want to go over is Eric Bana as Nero, who is a Romulan that fell into the black hole in the very beginning of the movie to go back in time. In my personal opinion, he is probably the dumbest Star Trek villain to ever be conceived. But we will go over that during the movie analysis. Now we get into the actual movie breakdown, where we will break down the most important parts of the story and the plot, since we just broke down the characters. Now, like I said about Eric Bana's Nero just a couple of seconds ago, he was the Romulan that fell through the black hole. Well, that's how the movie starts. Is the Federation is investigating a weird lightning storm near the neutral zone, and all of a sudden the Romulan ship comes out. To make a long story short, Kirk's father dies within the first 5 minutes of this movie, which over time I actually gave praise for, because it established that this is an alternate timeline whilst keeping the original timeline intact. Then really quick, it cuts to Kirk as a young kid who hijacks his stepfather's car. and basically shows like the rebellious side of James Tiberius Kirk. And then it cuts to Spock as a young child, where he's battling between his Vulcan side and his human side. Again, I'm going to try to keep a long story short during this breakdown, so we're just going to jump right to, Captain Pike recruits Kirk into Starfleet after a bar fight, and Captain Pike tries to convince Kirk that he can captain his own ship in 4, and he tells Pike, he'll do it in 3. Then it cuts to Kirk cheating the Kobayashi Maru, which we learned was the test that Spock created to elicit fear into the candidates. So, as a result of Kirk cheating on the Kobayashi Maru, he's placed on academic suspension. But, surprise, surprise, this is the moment when Vulcan gets attacked in the movie. And since he's placed on academic suspension, McCoy has to assist him into sneaking onto the Enterprise by ingesting him with some disease that only he can cure. So, by the time that they get to Vulcan, Kirk knows magically that Nero is over it because of the randomized lightning storms, as there was the same thing that killed his father. So, the Enterprise pulls out a warp over Vulcan, and it becomes a ship graveyard. And this is where we learn that Nero is using a drill to the planet's core. And so, what he does after this is starts to attack the Enterprise. He then gets a hold of Captain Pike to get him to come aboard, his ship. So Pike uses the opportunity to have Kirk, Sulu, and another engineer basically blow up the drill. It leads to them performing a very long drop. The engineer with the bombs basically dies, but Sulu and Kirk survive. It leads to an action scene between Kirk and Sulu versus a couple of the Romulans. Sulu fights one of the Romulans with the sword, whereas Kirk is doing nothing but fist fighting. And it leads to a bad action scene because I swear that J.J. Abrams does not know how to film action. He basically puts the camera up really close to both of the actors, so you can't really see what's going on half the time. But Kirk and Sulu don't actually stop the drill from drilling to the core. So Spock goes down onto Vulcan to rescue the Elders to preserve the culture. Nero drops the red matter in, and Vulcan pretty much just eats itself. And before Spock and the Elders can all be beamed back up, his mother dies in the process. Then Spock goes on about, how he's now part of, a race that's nearly extinct, which is true within the context of this movie. But he decides to go back and regroup with Starfleet instead of going and confronting Nero when he's clearly heading back for Earth. And Kirk, acting as his first officer, disagrees with his approach, and it leads to that superiority complex fight that I brought up during the character analysis. And Spock tries to have Kirk removed from the bridge and thrown in the brig. Kirk doesn't go down without a fight, so Spock uses the Vulcan neck pinch and just decides, well, we're going to shoot him off of the Enterprise because we need to get him off, and he lands on an ice planet. Why? Because for plot reasons. Yes, because on the same ice planet is where he runs into Spock Prime, aka Leonard Nimoy. Because we need to know all about Nero's motivations in this movie. 129 years from when this movie takes place, a supernova is going to wipe out Romulus. And Spock, who is an ambassador of Vulcan at the time, decides that he's going to go and help save Romulus. So he's going to take the red matter to create a black hole that will basically suck up the explosion from the supernova. Well, he gets to Romulus too late, and it gets completely destroyed. He still drops the red matter to suck up the explosion before it consumes any other world. And we find out that Nero was basically a miner coming back to Romulus who fell through that black hole and who had that fight with Kirk's father. And so Nero was waiting about 25 years for Spock Prime to fall through the black hole. So what took Nero 25 years took Spock maybe 10 seconds. Spock gets captured, and Nero takes him, puts him on the ice planet so that he can watch Vulcan be destroyed while he's completely powerless to do anything about it. So at least with this, Nero does have some motivations, even if it's based out of pure revenge. At least it's not a I want to take over the world or I want to take over the galaxy type of thing. Until it shows Nero again torturing Captain Pike for the access codes for the protection grid of the Federation on Earth. Why? Because Nero wants to go and destroy Earth so that Romulus can live in a Federation-free world. The only problem with this, with the logic that Nero has for this, is it's going to start another war between Romulus and the Federation. So if he's going to basically declare war on the Federation, who's going to come and save Romulus 129 years from that point during the supernova? Anyways, it cuts back to Spock Prime leading Kirk to Scotty, where they seek to beam aboard the Enterprise while in warp. Spock Prime does help Scotty find the equation to his transdimensional warp, whatever it's called. I apologize if anyone knows what that formula was. Please let me know because I'm currently blanking on it at the moment. And Spock Prime, and if I can talk today, Spock Prime tells Kirk that he needs to get Spock, Zachary Quinto's Spock, to elicit an emotional reaction to the mission so that he can recuse himself as captain of the Enterprise. And he tells Kirk that he just saw his home planet get wiped out. Believe me, he would be pretty emotional. Then Kirk beams back aboard the Enterprise and gets captured by security down in the engineering bay, along with Scotty. They get brought back up to the bridge, and here comes, Kirk versus Spock Superiority 2.0, and this time Kirk is successful in eliciting the emotional response that he needs from Spock in order for Spock to recuse himself as captain. So then Kirk decides to redirect the Enterprise back to Earth to catch up with Nero. And by the time they get to Earth, when Spock actually takes a fucking chill pill, Kirk and Spock decide to beam aboard Nero's ship because they need to get the ship that Spock Prime came on, because that's the one that had the red matter. So Spock takes command of Spock's ship. He flies down low enough into Earth to basically destroy the drill at the chain. So if they could just, shoot the chain and the drill gets destroyed, why did they not just do that at Vulcan? But that's neither here nor there. So then what Spock does is he takes Spock Prime's ship and basically kamikazes it into Nero's ship so that all that red matter will create a black hole to suck him in. All the while, Kirk is actually fighting Nero aboard his own ship. So Spock and Kirk get beamed back onto the Enterprise. Kirk then reaches out to Nero and offers him to save him. And Nero basically says, I'd rather go down with my ship than be imprisoned by the Federation. And Kirk just says, so be it. Which, in my opinion, is very counterintuitive to the Federation's mission. And also, it would have given the Enterprise crew a lot more credibility if they brought Nero in, took him to trial, and got him imprisoned. Basically, this guy who damn near wiped out the Vulcan race, killed billions upon billions of people, would have given them that extra, notch on their belt as to why the Enterprise crew is the best in the Federation. But instead, they just let the black hole suck Nero back in, not before launching a bunch of photon torpedoes at him to ensure that the ship never works. The problem is that during this point is that the black hole is sucking in the Enterprise. So I can't remember if it was either Kirk or Scotty that had the idea to launch the core into the black hole and blow it up so it would propel them out. But the problem with doing that is by launching the core into the black hole, in real life, that black hole would expand because the black hole has no mass. The only mass it has is whatever you put into it. So in actuality, it should have actually pulled in the Enterprise a lot faster. But I know we're getting into real life logic versus movie logic. So that one I can forgive very easily because there's been even weirder science fiction explanations in other movies. So now the Enterprise gets back to Earth where Spock has a one-on-one with Spock Prime, Leonard Nimoy, where Spock Prime goes into why, Spock Prime tells Zachary Quino's Spock, how important the friendship between him and Kirk actually is to the success of their future. My main issue with this is why couldn't, Chris Pine's Captain Kirk and Zachary Quino's Spock come to this conclusion themselves over the series of the next films? By having Spock Prime essentially tell them that, the friendship between you two is the most important, completely robbed any future character development between Spock and Kirk in the future installments. So now we get to the end of the movie where Kirk receives the rank of captain, and Captain Pike is in the wheelchair, not the same wheelchair as from The Cage, just a modern wheelchair, and Kirk relieves Pike of duty, and Spock then comes on and becomes his first officer, and that's the end of the movie. I know that it sounds like I just rushed through this analysis of the movie, the story, and the plot, but that's only because there really isn't a whole lot of meat on the bone to this movie. And this is not just isolated to this movie, it's most modern Hollywood blockbusters. They focus on style over substance, and really at the end of the day, this is all J.J. Abrams' Star Trek movie was. It was style over substance. The style was visually appealing, except for all the lens flares, but believe me, they are far worse than Star Trek Into Darkness. And the substance that's there is either just mediocre or is just outright stupid. So now we come up to the part of the episode where we ask the question, is this a good Star Trek movie? For those that have been listening for this long, I think my opinion was very clear during the movie analysis, and that answer is a big fat no. And it's a no because, in my opinion, it is completely illogical for both the Star Trek universe and even by the movie's own logic. It's just an average summer blockbuster with a Star Trek skin on it. Again, like I said a couple of seconds ago, it's very style over substance. However, this is the only Kelvin timeline movie that I can tolerate because it actually does the work of setting up an alternate timeline where they can go anywhere and expand upon it without interfering with the original timeline or remake anything from the original series or original 10 movies. I do believe that J.J. Abrams and Bad Robot were not the people to reboot Star Trek. If Paramount really wanted to reboot Star Trek, they needed to get people back like Nicholas Meyer or Jonathan Frakes, these longtime fans of the series that, just had a love for it at the time. This movie illustrated one thing very clearly, in that J.J. Abrams was a bigger Star Wars fan than Star Trek. And spoiler alert, he ruined that series in just 2 movies as well. But I also can't deny that commercially this movie was a hit at the time, grossing $385,680,446 worldwide on a budget of $150 million. So to Paramount, seeing this type of return was deemed to be sequel worthy. So now to cap off this episode with my personal ranking of J.J. Abrams' Star Trek. And I give this movie a solid 6 out of 10. Again, this is the only Kelvin timeline movie that I can really tolerate. But at the end of the day, it's just an average summer blockbuster with a Star Trek coat of paint on it. The sequels to this, in my opinion, were far worse, and I will be discussing those in future episodes. It's a good popcorn movie, but not a good Star Trek movie. I would love to know what you guys think about J.J. Abrams' Star Trek. Was it good? Was it bad? Am I in the minority? Am I in the majority? I don't know. Please let me know your thoughts down below. Subscribe to the channel while you're at it, whether that's on YouTube, BitChute, Dailymotion, etc. Make sure to follow MetrObelisk Radio at the social media links in the description. That way you can stay up to date when the newest episodes go up. If you have any topic suggestion for MetrObelisk Radio to cover, then please leave them in the comments. If I use your suggestion for a future episode, I will give you a shout out during that particular episode. With all of that said, have a great day, and I will see you guys next week.